welcome back to my channel. Today I'm shooting here in my design studio, which is in a warehouse district, all creatives in the area. So I'm just testing it out. It might be a little loud, so don't be surprised if you hear some, big trucks in the background stuff. It's very industrial area. So it's pretty cool. This is my space where I meet with clients. You can see here I have my fabric library. That's where I'll sit down with them and we'll go through different fabrics for their collection. But today what I want to talk about is the difference between a print and a pattern. And also I want to touch a little bit on the different types of print techniques, because I find that when a lot of people call in, that aren't from the fashion industry, they'll say to me, well, I want to do patterned clothes. And for me, patterned clothes is an actual print like this is what they typically call a pattern. So, and what I call a pattern in the industry is, I had touched this on another video, is an actual paper pattern which is placed on the fabric and then cut around to make your garment. Like this is a pant leg here. So this is what we call a pattern in the industry. So it gets a little confusing. However, in a printed fabric, there is a pattern to a print. So maybe that's where people get that term, that it's a pattern. So I want to touch on a little bit on the different prints techniques. So I wanted to show you, these are some gorgeous Italian printed fabrics that I have. Now these are for swimwear, but what we call this is an all-over pattern, meaning that the actual fabric, this one is digital printed, the actual fabric goes into a machine by the yard and it's printed. That's where you get the all over look, and it's also repeated. So this is great for swimwear, for apparel, and this type of printing technique is amazing because it doesn't bleed. So it can really withstand all the elements, sea, hot tub, jacuzzi, those types of things. So definitely a really good print technique for swimwear, activewear. Then another really popular type of print that my clients want to do is what I call a graphic print. That is where you have your logo or some sort of graphic that like a graphic designer would do, and it's directly printed on a t-shirt. Here's like a large, it's also called a direct print, meaning it's directly printed in one place on the garment. And a direct or graphic print is typically printed once the garment is actually made up. Whereas an all-over print is the fabric is printed, then you cut and sew the garment. So very, very big difference there. Price-wise, a graphic print is much less expensive because it's just a little spot on a garment, on the back. You don't have minimums. Usually when it comes to graphic print, you can do as little as one sample piece if you want. With sample, let's say with this yardage, you can buy this by the yard already printed. But if you wanted to do a custom all over print, the minimums, the minimum quantity that you can typically order from a mill is around 1,000 yards. So here's a swim piece that I did for a client. This was done in my Asia factory. Now this, thankfully, because my factories in Asia are vertical operations, meaning they have the printing in-house, they don't have those types of high minimums. So I can do as little as 200 units printed for a client with my Asia factories. Now in the United States, it's quite different. And I have not worked with or found a factory here in the US that has a vertical operation with the printers in-house. So typically what I'd have to do is send the fabric yardage from the mill to the printer. Most of the good ones are out in California, and have it printed, then shipped back to the factory so they can cut and sew the garment. So it tends to be quite costly for my clients, So I don't do a lot of printing here in the States anymore. Now with the graphic printing, same type of deal. Whether you do, screen print like this, or some sort of vinyl print. Again, in the States, it's got to be done in another location, printer. And when you're, a small emerging designer, it can be expensive because you got to pay to have the screen cut. They won't hold it for you unless you place your order within 2 weeks. And you're competing against these large companies that are ordering huge quantities. So again, I've been doing most of this type of printing in Asia. Now, another thing that I would call a pattern is there's like a yarn dye and a stripe, and which can create a pattern in a fabric. So I'm going to grab my book here, Shirting Fabrics book here, and show you some different types of patterns that are within a fabric. Now, these are not printed onto a fabric, they're actually woven, so they're yarn dyed. So think about each thread is literally dyed in a vat. It's like they dip it in a vat and each yarn is dyed. So this is, you're familiar with this. This is a gingham check, we call it. So each thread in here is dyed and then woven together. So this is not printed. So it goes through and through. You could very well print the look of a gingham, but this is considered a yarn dye. These are great because they last a lot longer, yarn dyes. They won't fade as much because the actual thread is dyed and woven, as opposed to the fabric being grayish goods, which is white goods that's then printed. So that color can fade, over time. So we call this could be called a pattern within a fabric. Just to can't talk. I literally can't say that word. Just to differentiate between the different types of patterns. So here's some yarn dyed stripes. Here, this is a lot of men's shirting, women's shirting. That's why these fabrics are usually more expensive, because of the actual yarn dye. So it's a more expensive technique. And I would say most people do not yarn dye their own fabric. They buy it, already dyed from a fabric mill. Your denim. Well, denim could be piece dyed. Piece dyed is when let's say your jean is already made and they dip it into the dye and it gets dyed as a piece. So it's a piece, it's already made up. But typically the fabric is woven together. So I'll just show you here's a men's suiting fabric. So this is considered a yarn dye as well. Very tailored fabric. You see it has just that one thread that goes through it. Through and through. That's how you can usually tell the difference too between a print, because a print will typically have the white backside versus a yarn dye. I'll show you. Here's a denim. This is a tencel denim. So all your denims are typically yarn dyed. Sometimes they can print a denim effect. It doesn't look as cool, I don't think. And then another cool thing about fabrics is texture. So you could have the effect of a texture on a print. I mean, for example, this leopard one here, it looks like it has a texture, but it's really flat. Then I have actual, what I'd call textured fabrics. Like this fabric here, I don't know if you can see, there you go. It's ribbed. It actually has a raised rib to it. You see what I mean? It's very warehousey over here. I love it though. And then this one here, this is a mesh that's used on activewear. And it almost has, you see, like a honeycomb effect. So if you touch it, it's actually bumpy. So this is what I call textured fabric. I really wouldn't call this pattern fabric. I mean, there is a pattern within it, but I'd call it a textured fabric. So these are really nice too in your collection when you want to give some depth to your collection. Like let's say I had a client, she used this on a swimwear piece and she mixed it with print and it looked really cool. It gives a nice high-low effect. So there you go, the difference between a print, a pattern, and then I just touched a little bit on some different types of printing. So you have, again, you have a graphic print, which we do on t-shirts, which I would say, you know, I do graphic design in-house, but a lot of times the client will come to me with their logo or their graphic that they want to have printed already, you know, on their garments. And then a pattern, a paper pattern or digital pattern is what we use to cut and sew your actual garment. So if you reach out and you say, Jessica, I want to do a pattern on clothes, I'll know what you mean, but I'm trying to educate everybody that it's really a print that you're wanting to do. And as far as, you know, creating your own yardage of fabric that's printed, you know, I can do that in Asia for as little as 200 units. So it makes it really accessible for people that want to, you know, be bold and put their prints out there. So there you go. Thanks, guys, and have a good day. Stay inspired.